Thank you for that kind introduction. So today I will be talking about something somewhat different in style from a lot of the other talks. I'm not so much presenting research results or new systems like in many of my other talks for spring schools and elsewhere. I'm speaking about BCI science fiction or BCI-fi, which I'll define coming up here. So basically that just refers to any science fiction with BCIs. And the narratives don't have to revolve around a BCI. So if you have a BCI in a book or a movie or a comic book or TV episode or something, even if it's not important to the story, it could easily be written out. You, you still count as an example of BCI. And most examples that were analyzed include computer to brain interfaces, in other words, devices that write to the brain, and other brain-related devices and plot elements. So it's usually not just, say, an electrode cap that reads from the brain like what I'm wearing right now. This is just a BCI when it's turned on and being used as such. Usually you see, this is science fiction. Things could be far in the future. They have very unrealistic capabilities, and they're often hybridized with other components. They might be invasive and or non-invasive. And so it's often neurotech fiction instead, rather than being just BCI science fiction, which is not a complaint. It's just an explanation to sort of situate what I'm defining here for the purposes of this talk. And I conducted this work in collaboration with a professor named Eric Rabkin. So a lot of this talk is similar to work on a paper that I developed, and also I put a lot of this material on a website or posted it elsewhere. And this is kind of interesting because it's a new collaboration. You've seen a lot of work where BCIs are interdisciplinary. You have collaborations with neuroscientists and engineers, programmers, medical experts, and so on. You don't see a lot of publications or other activities that involve collaborations with a literature expert. But Professor Rabkin is an expert in science fiction. That's the main genre that he studies and teaches. And he was, of course, very helpful in exploring this combination between BCIs, which is my expertise, and literature, which is his expertise. So what's the relevance? Why bother with this study and with looking at examples of BCI-fi and reading them and talking about them? Well, it can be fun, and science has long interacted with science fiction. Arthur C. Clarke, for example, you have the Clarke Belt for satellites. He was a satellite expert as well as a great science fiction writer. And so there may be examples of this with BCI-fi influencing BCIs and vice versa. A lot of narratives raise ethical issues that are worth discussion. I have a lot of examples of these later in the talk. So you might consider, thinking about them, discussing them. They could be brought up in classes. Even though they may involve some BCIs that are unrealistic, they may relate to issues that are worthwhile, not just in the future, but today. They could help to sort of frame guidelines or regulations, standards, other kinds of things to help protect users. And, BCI-fi influences people. It can inspire people, it can inform them or misinform them, it can scare people. So a very small number of people get really scared about narratives that involve controlling other people's brains, for example. They can be very concerned, even threatening to real BCI people. And so that is something to watch out for. And it can influence people's decisions about studying BCIs. Do they want to buy one? Do they want to use one? Might they want to go into a career with them? So in the case of Christoph Guger, he has already made the decision to manufacture them and research them and lots of other things. But many other people, especially in the future, don't know what they're going to do. And they might say, oh, I want to study this because I was inspired by a certain webisode or something. Or they may say, oh, I don't want to use this device that could help me out because I'm afraid unrealistically of what it might do.
And I'm
And
just
also, a lot of
interrupting.
people think some of this is possible today. And I'll get to this later in the talk. Even though people realize these are fictitious stories, they think, oh, these reflect capabilities that are currently possible. As far as activities involving BCI-fi recently, I have a website that here about the topic. I wrote a paper that's in review with Eric Rabkin, as I mentioned. We had two BCI Thursday events that discussed this topic through the BCI Society. And you can see on the bottom in blue, there's a box that says there's past BCI Thursdays recordings. And we had several experts in the topic and writers come and talk about what they're doing. So various examples of people who produce it. We also had a special guest lecture from Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian. Soon he will be traveling to London to work on the production of his new movie, which is Project Hail Mary, starring Ryan Gosling. So I hope it's a good one. Although it is not BCI-fi, and neither was The Martian. I led a poster at the BCI meeting in 2023 about this. So there was a conference that occurred in Belgium last year, and at that conference, I also had a BCI movie night. And so the idea was that we would play clips from different movies, and then we had a discussion panel. It included Eric Rabkin and Professor Kosmia from MIT and some other people. And of course, another possible implementation of a movie night, not just for me, but people out there. You could do this with your lab or a class or whatever public event. You simply play a series of movies somewhere and have popcorn and soda and perhaps other beverages as you may feel appropriate. What were the formal selection criteria for this? So how did we choose which narratives, that is, which stories or examples to choose? And formally, we had none. We did not create a ranking system or something and create number values and select based on that. We considered some objective measures like the number of books that were sold or film revenue, reviewer ratings, examples here. But it's very difficult to compare across these when you're looking at books, comic books, movies, TV shows, and other examples that I'll show here. And we, of course, considered informal criteria too. So was it well known? Did it raise issues worth discussion? So that doesn't mean was it worth discussion overall, but within the context of the work that we were producing, the earlier paper and now this talk, was it something that was worthy of attention? Perhaps it connected to a specific topic that we wanted to address, and so on. And also we wanted to avoid biases. So there are a lot of examples of this in Star Trek or the writings of Philip K. Dick. And this would be a great topic for a future article, talk, poster, whatever. Probably not by me, but if you're like, oh, I want to see more examples from this particular genre or writer or type of device or theme or whatever, I look forward to reading it. So we also evaluated the different examples. We assessed realism when it was written or produced. So some of these examples in the paper go back to the 20s. Here I have examples starting in the 60s. And next, how realistic is it today? And then 10 years from today. We considered altruism and hope presented in different aspects of the narrative. We looked at ethical issues, neurotechnology use, connections to real-world BCI research, and connections to other BCI-fi? Did it raise themes or topics or examples similar to other stories? We considered features and lessons that span dozens of narratives. And it's important to emphasize, which is why it's in red, these evaluations don't relate to whether we liked it or whether it's good or whether it's recommended, you should watch it, anything like that. These are just for academic purposes, and again, largely to raise issues for discussion. Of course, this is fiction. It's in the title, it's in the definition. And you need tension. You can't really have a good story in a purely altruistic world where nothing is wrong and everybody's perfect and so on. It has been tried. So in the next part of my talk, which is the main part, I'm going to give a lot of examples of BCI science fiction and some commentary on each one. And so here we go. So one early example comes from Star Trek, which this was written by Gene Roddenberry. This is a pilot episode developed in 1965. And the system used here is slow. It's a BCI that enables this person, Captain Pike, to control a wheelchair, and he can convey yes or no. So it's few commands. It's admirable in the limitations that it has, not that that's something to be desired, but in that it's not this ultra futuristic high-tech system that can do everything and it's perfect, and he's restored to capabilities similar or better than what he had before his accident. Doesn't have any visible sensors. It might be an invasive system. It might be on the back of his head. We can't see it from this angle. But it's nice because it's an example, unlike most stories, of a BCI system that is used as an assistive technology, as an AT, for a disabled user. That is, it is not a system meant to abuse people or cause any trouble in any way. It's a very altruistic example of BCI use within science fiction. And not only is this realistic for well in the future, it's realistic today. So making a BCI that's fairly slow and allows a few commands like this has been done. Again, we don't know quite the sensor mechanism, but we'll let him go on that. And among all the examples that we reviewed, this is one of the most ethical overall. The purpose of the BCI itself is, again, to help a disabled user to restore or replace some lost capability. And presumably this person has good medical care. The people using the BCI or helping him use the BCI, the relevant doctors are well-intentioned and are good and all that. They actually don't use it much in the plot. This system is relatively irrelevant to the plot. That it doesn't revolve around this particular character's use of a BCI. He might have had some other type of injury. And so that's unlike a lot of other examples where the neurotechnology is central to the plot. So here is one such example. So the book this was based on came out in 1966, written by Philip K. Dick. This is a picture from the movie in 1990, the first movie about it. So this, of course, is or can be used as an involuntary system. Presumably, it can affect people's memories and personalities and actions and other details against their will. There are different interpretations of the plot. I'm not going to go into that. And it's perfectly realistic. To the people using it, it's indistinguishable from reality. You have full read and write capability. You can see everything and have all sensory experiences perfectly. You can also send information perfectly. You can move, you can execute complex movements, dangerous movements, fighting, all kinds of things, all through this system. And it raises many ethical questions, but one of them is the intended application for this is to implant fake memories into people who were willing. They even paid for it. and you can have memories of vacations that you didn't take, and it's presumably cheaper and safer and whatnot than taking a real vacation. You could see some good applications of this. They could be used for therapeutic purposes. They could help you to maintain sanity in a difficult environment and so on. Could even be used as AT for disabled users. It's not in this particular story, but potentially could be. Obviously, this is highly unrealistic, mainly because of the realism of it. And I have a slide on this much later. This is a common theme in BCI-fi. You see this perfectly immersive alternate reality that we just can't do today. And it's mostly unethical. The plot in both the book and the movie, which are pretty different after the first third or so of the book, differ considerably in terms of what the applications are, the way that it's used, and what the plot revolves around. In the movie, which most people have seen, are obviously very dystopian and worrisome, and that's what creates an interesting story. So that example was 1966. This is 1969. And I wanted to include this because it features a BCI for a new user group, which is dead people. And again, we choose some examples just in part because they raised topics that we wanted to discuss. And this was one that I just couldn't avoid, especially in a talk here, because I wanted to get in a jibe at Christoph Guger. So Christoph has failed to capitalize on this user group. He has run a very good company and made BCIs from new user groups, but he has, at least as far as I know, never used a BCI with dead people, and he's never developed one. And I mean, think about the size of this user group, Christoph. You have more dead people than live people. It's bigger than all other people. So if you can only make a BCI to communicate with dead people, that would be the most interesting breakthrough in the history of the field. So in this story, the BCI only allows limited communication. So it's not perfectly realistic. You can't get incredibly high bandwidth communication, for example. And it has another interesting limitation, which is crosstalk. So when you're trying to talk to your dead relative, or in this case, your dead wife of the protagonist, you have a lot of crosstalk from other BCI users. There's another person there who's also dead, and he's a kid, and creates crosstalk. And again, it's I can't comment on the realism of it because you can't use BCIs with dead people. Another interesting limitation is that you can only use it for a limited time after death. It's not like people can just stay alive after dying forever and use BCIs forever. So there are limitations in how much you can communicate with people after they die. Is it realistic? I mean, of course not. It's wonderfully unrealistic. You're welcome to correct me. And again, I encourage Christoph to do it. So if you think I'm mistaken, well, make a BCI for dead people. I'm not saying you can't put a cap on some dead people, but no, and one that actually works and communicates their original thoughts, no. And also it's kind of somewhat ethical. I mean, you are kind of helping a group of people with very severe disabilities, which is death. Anyway, this was from 1982. Here you see Christopher Walken using a delightful prop. And this is a very bulky system, you'll notice. Misuse is very dangerous. The plot relies around the idea that they invented a room temperature superconductor. So this is pretty unrealistic today. And it's sometimes unethical. So the plot revolves around this breakthrough system, and you can read and write experiences and then sell them to other people, so other people can experience what you experienced. This is also a pretty common theme in BCI-fi. You see it in other narratives that I'll mention and others that I won't mention. And so it can be ethical in the sense that you could use it for training or relaxation and fun and somewhat some things. but it's obviously to create some excitement and some development in the plot. It has some unethical applications as well here and causes harm to someone. And I'll move on. Here was something from Michael Crichton. He wrote The Terminal Man in 1972, and the medical goal was to reduce seizures. So this was a system that was used within a hospital. Medical doctors were involved. It was not some crazy system for people without training. And the side effects cause stimulation of pleasure areas and reinforcement that make the patient commit murder. And it raises this good question of who is responsible. And this is one where, today it's not directly relevant. There are no examples of people who have murdered other people because of their BCI or other examples of similar neurotechnologies. But the question of who's responsible if the BCI sends an erroneous command or causes some type of mistake or even changes the user's desires or activities or emotions or sanity, such as in the example of the Terminal Man, these kinds of things are discussed and will continue to be discussed and should be. And of course, like in the book, we want to avoid these kinds of unethical side effects that even raise these questions in the first place. And this was an interesting example in that it was written by a medical doctor. So the author, Michael Crichton, finished Harvard Medical School in 1969, just a little bit before this. He studied the works of Penfield, who did a lot of research and clinical work involving stimulation of the nervous system. And so it shows here, it's obvious from the book that this is something developed by a person who was not a BCI specialist, but certainly had some relevant experience and training. Is it realistic today? Yes. And this is something I've discussed with neurosurgeons in the field. Eric Luthart, for example, considers this one of his favorite works. Using modern technology, we could produce at least some of the effects like seen in the Terminal Man. The side effects of murder and such, that's more speculative, but it doesn't rely on soft science fiction or technologies that are way beyond anything we have today. And the intended use, at least, was highly ethical. It's also interesting that it gets sort of a highly ethical consideration because it raises ethical issues worth discussion. You have an oversight committee, you have medical doctors that often discuss the ramifications of what they're doing and whether they're doing something wrong, and should they take certain actions in different, anyway. You also have consideration of device safety and what are the issues around the usage of a not totally approved device. This is a lot more attention to some ethical details than you see in a lot of other BCI-fi examples. In 1980, you had this from The Empire Strikes Back. And is it realistic and is it ethical? Well, it's hard to say. And the reason is it's unclear from the movie whether this is even a BCI or how it works, what it does, why this character has it, whether it's invasive, and so on. There are other Star Wars stories that explore them further. It is somewhat bulky relative to a lot of other ones, not the one in Brainstorm. Firefox came out a couple years later, and this was a interesting example that's unrealistic today. For one thing, the BCI and the user learn very quickly. There's no training delay, and this is common in a lot of other examples. The BCI doesn't have to learn Clint Eastwood's unique brain patterns. The user doesn't have to learn how to use the system. It's mostly unethical. It's used for military superiority in a Cold War environment, and there's a lot of stealing things and spy stuff. This is also one where it raises the question of why pilots don't use these today. Now, I don't refer to sort of passive systems to measure attention and overload and things which might be closer to reality for that user group, but for direct control, for actually flying an aircraft, for making split-second decisions, firing weapons, using other aircraft systems. And at least in this film, presumably the BCIs are giving him capabilities beyond what he could do otherwise with hands or voice control or other biosignals or so on. Maybe he can send more information or send it more quickly, but this is an interesting change from today that makes this a reasonable story, at least within the genre that they have. Again, it's not realistic today. I don't see BCIs being used for highly futuristic prototype aircraft of this nature in the near future. Again, for other purposes, they might be useful, but yeah, it's a Clint Eastwood movie. It has the interesting line, think Russian. So the BCI and the user learn very quickly, in part because Clint Eastwood just thinks in Russian, and that makes it possible for the BCI to correctly read his thoughts. Most people don't think of Ghostbusters as a movie about BCIs, and that's true. It's not really about BCIs, but there is a brief use of them. This may be somewhat realistic before too long. I don't refer to the colander on his head. That I'll mention that a little bit later. And it could be ethical. It's just reading activity. So basically, the device is used to read images in brains. And you see on the right side a very low resolution version of a ghost dog that he'd seen. And Rick Moranis's brain is producing images while he thinks about it, and that just shows up on the monitor. It's low resolution, so it's not a perfect mind reading device. Um, and this colander head is something that comes up a lot in BCI science fiction, the idea that you can make a good device out of a colander. And I personally can't. Christoph could make a decent device, but no, there's nothing really special about colanders. It makes it easy to put wires within the holes. That looks kind of cool, like in this example, but they're not actually good ways to mount sensors on the head. In the same year, in 1984, a book came out called Neuromancer. This was a very influential book in the cyberpunk genre. Apple is working on a series based on Neuromancer, so I hope that's good. And like some other examples, this is pretty unrealistic today. Like Firefox, it enables someone to have wildly improved capabilities, in this case, to hack. And the person can hack much better. He's hacking something called the matrix so that he can get money, achieve jobs for clients, and so on. And so some bad guys cause brain damage, and therefore he can't use BCIs to hack. So this is a kind of, a nasty world. It's often dystopian. Applications are generally unethical. You can think of some ethical uses, but again, it's generally not a nice BCI world. This is another example from Star Trek. This was not the original series, but Next Generation. This is one of the dumber episodes. Highly trained officers use a random game that makes them evil. And the lessons are, don't use a brain device with no device certification or safety. Don't use it from an unknown manufacturer, from an unknown species. If you do, at least tell a doctor. Strange Days came out a few years later, and in this, you can record experiences and sell them to other people who can replay and experience them. But this is illegal in this world. So in the world of Strange Days, these recordings or tapes are sold underground for people. And this is still unrealistic today. I say still because I talked about this also in Brainstorm. It's a recurring theme where you can record your experiences and other people can have the same experience. First, you can't record experiences that with such high fidelity and so perfectly and error-free with such detail and precision. And second, you can't write to the brain that well either. And in this world, it's mostly unethical. It's not really the worst application. A lot of people just want to have other people's experiences for relatively innocent reasons, but there are also a lot of sketchy applications too. Another interesting thing in this world is that these systems are common. The recording and selling these tapes are, that's sketchy, but it's not like some other examples like Firefox. It's a prototype system, and Brainstorm, it's the first example of the system. It's not like other examples where these systems are relatively unknown within that narrative. So, of course, many people are familiar with the Matrix movies. And this also includes a type of theme I've been getting at before, and we'll talk about more, where because it's a far future fiction, or at least it has very advanced technology, it's sort of a perfect system. It includes a perfect computer to brain interface. In other words, it can write to the brain as well as read from the brain. It's fully immersive, perfectly realistic, can't distinguish it from reality. It's instant, it has an unlimited vocabulary. And by this, I mean not just that it can interpret a lot of words. You can think anything or say anything or imagine anything and it gets picked up, but also outputs like motor commands. You can move, you can flip, you can fire weapons, you can do all kinds of things. It doesn't seem to have any errors. There's the comment about the glitch in the Matrix, but for the most part, it reads and writes without any errors. Of course, this is unrealistic today. It's very unethical. There are many uses of neurotechnology in the Black Mirror episodes, and there are different seasons of it. It started in 2011. And you see this box is similar to the box in the last slide for a reason. It also uses a BCI that has similar highly advanced capabilities. This one seems to be non-invasive. It's just a little device that you put on the temple. You don't need to wear a cap. You don't seem to need even more than one sensor, and so on. It also includes a perfect computer-to-brain interface, fully immersive, works instantly, unlimited vocabulary, no errors. Again, this is not possible today, but it's a fictional example. Most applications in these are unethical, but of course, these Black Mirror episodes are often meant to raise ethical discussions and sort of stir disagreement and different interpretations of the plot and what it means. So living after death, for example, through a BCI, or being able to move while you're terminally disabled, and interact with someone and fall in love, like the episode at the top. Well, that's a fairly nice application of BCIs. This is a series called Electric Dreams that was started in 2018. Also unrealistic today, mostly unethical, but it's worth discussion because it raises this issue of a world that's indistinguishable from reality, where the protagonist has to decide which reality to live in. So the plot centers around her being unable to determine whether she's originally in her real world and that's her real background, or originally in the BCI created fake world. So in this BCI fake world, she also has memories and experiences and personal relationships and a job and all kinds of things. And so it's so convincing, she just can't tell the difference. So for the next part of my talk, I'll discuss recurring components. First, the capabilities. In other words, recurring components that we identified across multiple narratives of BCI-fi. And first, I talk about the capabilities of different systems, and then I'll go into story elements. So first, you see a lot of BCI exaggeration. And this means that the capabilities of BCIs are greatly exaggerated relative to what's possible today or in the foreseeable future. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, discussing the realism relevant to what's realistic today does not mean that we're discussing whether it was a good story or we liked it or we recommend it. It's just a discussion for academic purposes. But BCIs today still require some training. They don't work for everyone. They usually require some kind of training, at the very least, learning how the BCI system works, like any interface. They're not literal interfaces where you just put something on and anything that you think appears on the screen or gets executed. Errors are still a challenge. Bandwidth and vocabulary are low. BCIs require paying attention. They often are not hybridized with other tools, and they're too realistic. They can read the brain perfectly. They have an unlimited vocabulary, all kinds of detailed movements. They can often pick up subconscious thoughts. The plot, like examples I showed, may involve people unsure if they're in reality. And this type of perfect embodiment actually does come up today. So in VR, there's this concept of perfect embodiment where you may not have a perfect simulation of the reality, but you believe that you do. You sort of fill in the blanks. You don't pay attention to information to suggest that you're in another reality. You're fully immersed. Christoph Guger has worked a lot with a guy named Mel Slatter, and he has a lot of papers about this topic, including papers with Christoph about VR and EEG. And this creates opportunities for writers. So this is another comment that we made in my article, in our article, that I wanted to repeat here, that writers could develop plot elements and interesting situations and such with so-called hard science fiction. That is science fiction that is more constrained by reality, where the BCIs are imperfect. They make mistakes, they have flaws. You see a lot of examples of BCIs with flaws that I presented before, and that's nice. It added to the story and also helped make the system in the story, as well as the story itself, seem more realistic. At least within the world that was created by the writer, it seemed consistent with that world. And another way that BCIs are exaggerated is they often have computer to brain interfaces. They can write to the brain. They can write sensations, including internal senses, not just vision and touch and stuff, but also pain and hunger and so on. Various other types of features that can be written to the brain. People, again, may be unsure where they are. And finally, I'll talk about story elements that recur. One is that the neurotechnology relevance varies. That is, in some cases, the narratives revolve around neurotechnology. I put 3 examples on the screen where these are central to the plot. There's no easy way to write neurotechnology out to replace it with something else. And other examples only mention this briefly. So Star Trek The Cage, like I said, when I discussed it, it wasn't really necessary for the patient there to have that particular device. If you'd written it out, it wouldn't have affected the plot. Same thing apparently with The Empire Strikes Back or Ghostbusters. Lobot could have been not wearing that thing. It wouldn't have really mattered. They could have got the information from just interviewing the guy. They didn't have to put a colander on his head. And this may also be true within the story. That is, the relevance of neurotechnologies within that world, within the story, may be more or less relevant. I gave some examples where the BCI is very much unknown within the world. The general public doesn't know about it. It's a new breakthrough. It's a prototype system. And in other examples, the system is everywhere. Everybody has BCIs. Another common theme is that neurotech enables controlling others. And usually people control other people or robots. These are 3 examples. So in X-Men, Professor X can control other people. In Surrogates and Altered Carbon, people use brain interfaces to control robots. And so in the latter 2 examples, if your robot dies, your surrogate or whatever, you don't die in real life. It's not really a big deal. You can have robots go out and do things that are otherwise unsafe, and there aren't really any negative side effects. This is also true with cockroaches. So this is an example of a system you can buy today, and Christoph knows about it. It's called the Backyard Brain System, and you can use it to control cockroaches. You can make them turn left and right and run a maze. No, they didn't pay me for this, but I just thought about it because within the context of BCI science fiction about controlling other people or robots, well, you could already control a cockroach. This is not science fiction. And from the cockroach perspective, this could be considered a very dystopian alternate reality. It raises a lot of ethical issues. The most obvious ethical issue is, why don't you get this system off me and let me go about my life freely? And why aren't people punished for doing this? And why don't we have any lawyers that defend us? And the answer is that you're cockroaches. So BCIs often are for evil in different ways. First, the entities that own or manage the BCIs are evil. So not the people that actually use the BCI, but the people that have control over it, the people that own it, that somehow not only manage it, but manage the people who use it in many cases. And they're often used for selfish, non-altruistic goals. So you want to make a lot of money, you want to take over the world, you want to harm people, whatever. Regulations and oversight are ineffective or not mentioned. So either there aren't any regulatory entities or ethical review boards and so on, but they either aren't there at all or they don't have any effect. There are counterexamples. So like with the Terminal Man, they talk about these oversights and regulations a lot, but for the most part, they're not part of the story. Neurosurgery can be quite casual. So unlike today, in a lot of science fiction examples, you can just put implants in people casually. The world and its society are often dystopian and elitist. Again, this is not often true. BCI users may not understand or consent to BCI use. So the Matrix is an obvious example. Most people in that world aren't even aware of the Matrix or what's going on. And BCI use is usually bad for the user. It would have been better off to not use it. These are 3 examples of stories that include ethical discussions and discuss, within the characters in the story, but there are other examples too. Another thing that we noticed is that there are not very many comedies in this genre. So in addition to being examples of science fiction, a lot of stories are action stories, drama, or horror, but you don't see a lot of comedy. The Man with Two Brains wasn't really a movie about the interface. It was a Steve Martin comedy. Ghostbusters, it was kind of comedic use. There was a TV series called The Fringe. Yes, that guy is wearing aluminum foil. He does look a little bit like Niels Bierbaumer, but he's not quite as crazy. Another thing that we noticed in our review of different examples is that there isn't a lot of BCI science fiction from experts. These are 2 examples that are written by experts. So Red Devil there is written by Eric Luthart, who I mentioned earlier. He does have some papers in the field and is a neurosurgeon. And then I wrote a chapter analyzing the bi-fi within Fringe, the TV series Fringe. So it wasn't an original story, it was an analysis. And so finally, I'll talk about future directions, not just for me, but also for you. So any of you might want to do this too. So you might have been thinking, well, where's my example? Where's my favorite movie or book or whatever? And you can create some, you can write new implementations of them, meaning take someone else's work, something that someone else has written, and maybe you're an animator or some kind of producer, make it more accessible, better known. You can make new articles about it. So you could explore different authors or genres, like I talked before about Philip K. Dick or the Star Trek genre, or other genres like themes bi-fi within horror, for example. types of devices, are they for brain control? Are they invasive? And other types of themes that you could study. As far as recent activities, and activities you could do and that I might also do, lectures in person and online. So this is one example. I am now giving an online lecture. Discussion like the BCI Thursdays, and I mentioned that before. I'll talk about that again soon. Movie nights with discussion, conference workshops and symposia. And again, I encourage people to create or produce more of it. It would also be nice to have an award. Right now, there is no such award specific to it. It could be good publicity. You might be able to get sponsors. You can be involved. This might be somewhat modeled after the BCI Research Awards, and I thought this would be a good place to close it. And Christoph will be happy to see that I am reminding people that submissions are open. The submission deadline is September 1st, 2024 of this year. And finally, Christoph will be happy to see a picture of his daughter Stella there, saying thank you. And I also thank Christoph for hosting me, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Brendan, for the nice lecture. Please open the Q&A. Adrian is asking, any opinion about Dr. Brain? Do you know the series in Korea?
No, I do not know it, but I'm writing it down so I can check it out. Thank you. I'm looking at the chat and the Q&A now.
Any other questions for Brendan?
Yeah, I can take questions too.
Any readings you suggest? So what's up next? Where are you going, Brendan?
I don't know. There's the Graz BCI conference in September, but I don't have a travel plan now. It looks like people agree with me that if you could make a BCI for dead people, that would really make you a lot of money. It's a great opportunity, Christoph.
Oh yeah. So how many people lived so far? Do you know?
I don't know how many people have died as of now. I could look it up, but in the same amount of time, other people can look it up.
So
yeah, uploading the brain, this was a discussion point that comes up. This is also a popular theme, and this is similar to the Human Brain Project. Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly the same goal, but can you store some of your brain activity on a computer and thereby have experiences even after your body dies? This was, like Black Mirror, I mentioned in that one episode. And of course, the the example in Ubik where after people die, you can just communicate with them.
Joanna is saying 11 billion people died so far. So
Okay.
you would need 11 billion BCI systems.
Well, get at it. You're going to have to hire more people and make, anyway.
It's roughly the number of cell phones that exist, isn't it?
It's more than the number of live people today.
Did you see Matt had the same supervisor at UCSD like you?
Oh,
Jamie
no, sorry.
Pineda, he chatted before.
Oh, Jamie was a great guy.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brendan, for being here. Pleasure to see you as usual. Hope to see you soon again.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to speak, and enjoy the rest of your spring school.